Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jen Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 217. And you might want to watch the volume on this one. It's sensitive information. And it's for your ears only. For England. Or for at least video game England, I suppose. Because we're doing a little bit of a retrospective on James Bond in video games inspired by the recently released 007 First Light from I.O. And given that most of what I know about James Bond is what was talked about him in Operation Mincemeat, the musical, we are joined by a guest who is far more knowledgeable about this and recently recorded their own episode about First Light from the Still Loading podcast. Josh Koval, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. I will take any excuse possible to talk about James Bond. Believe it or not, I don't really get that many chances to do so. So I'm always appreciative when people invite me on to talk about it, whether in video games or movies or otherwise.
Amazing.
Jen and I were lucky enough to get review codes from 47PR and IO Interactive, and grateful for that. Always a blast. Like, as we love to focus on the indies, it's always fun when we get a AAA code here and there. And the minute we got the review codes, I think even before we knew we were getting them, I basically said to Josh, we're going to do a James Bond retrospective. Will you come on? Like, there was not another thought. It was just Josh. You're currently doing Still Muppeting, but you did Still Family. And before that, you did Still Bonding, which was your James Bond retrospective, movie retrospective. Mm-hmm. You've done several panels, but also did your own live episode that you recorded on Twitch, doing basically a history of Bond. And so I guess before we run to First Light and talk about the history of these games, I think a good place to start is to just talk about all of our histories with James Bond. And since, Josh, you are the expert, let's start with you. Do you remember the first movie you saw and kind of where your fandom has taken you with this franchise?
Yeah. The first James Bond movie I ever saw was The World Is Not Enough, which was Pierce Brosnan's third outing as James Bond. I still think it's his best outing. That's a hot take by a lot of people because Denise Richards is in that, and she's not good, but it's also partially the script's fault, but that's besides the point. But I first saw it because it was back in the day when cable TV was still a thing. And, periodically, if they were trying to sell you on upgrade packages, they would give you free trials of like Showtime or HBO, any one of those channels that would just show unedited full films. I think it was Showtime. We got a trial of Showtime and they had the movie on. And this was like shortly after it was done in theaters. And we recorded it on VHS tape, like we had somewhere there is a VHS tape of The World Is Not Enough. And that's how I first experienced James Bond, was through that VHS tape. And I was obsessed with it. It also probably James Bond really hits, especially for young boys starting puberty, because, kind of obvious with what James Bond is known for. So I watched it and I was just blown away by it. It wasn't because of the Bond girls or anything like that. Obviously did help, but like the cold open to The World's Not Enough has James Bond in a bank in Bilbao, Spain. I don't know if I pronounced that city correctly, but in Spain, and he's trying to retrieve money for a friend of M's. M is the leader of MI6, the head of MI6, a friend of M's. And there's some sketchy stuff going on, and he ends up having to fight his way out of this bank. He basically gets a gun pulled on him, and he blows up a flashbang grenade that is his pistol. Like, they have his pistol and he has a button in his glasses that he hits that causes the flashbang to go off. And immediately I'm like, what the fuck's going on? This is crazy. And he locks himself in the room and he gets what he needs to. And then he breaks the window. He's on like the third floor of this bank, and he takes like the cords of the blinds and he ties a bunch of them together and repels out this window. And my 10-year-old brain is like melting. I'm like, what? I've never seen action like this in my life. This is amazing. Ever since then, I've been in love with the series. And so of course then I had to go play the games. GoldenEye was a staple of my childhood. The World Is Not Enough was actually the first Bond game I also played because my parents knew I was a fan of the movie. And side note, it's a better game than GoldenEye. GoldenEye is not the best Bond game on the N64. Don't let people tell you otherwise. World Is Not Enough is better. Maybe a hot take, but I'm going to stand by it. And then I fell in love with the franchise ever since. I've watched every movie since. My journey with it has been like interesting because as I've gotten older, I now recognize the more problematic elements of it that went right over my head as a kid. I think the reason, though, my fandom has continued to grow, though, is because Bond as a character has evolved with the times, and Daniel Craig as Bond is completely different from Sean Connery as Bond. And I think that's what has brought so much longevity to the series and why I continue to love it today.
Do you have a definitive favorite Bond, or are you someone who likes them all and can't pick your favorite child? Blah blah blah.
Yes, actually, I do have a favorite Bond. It's not the best Bond, but it's my favorite, and it's Roger Moore.
Those are different things.
I love Roger Moore.
It's a solid choice. Yeah, of course, sure.
I think also the era of Pierce Brosnan that you got started with also dovetails nicely into Roger Moore's outings as Bond. They are a little more, I don't want to say ridiculous, but they are outlandish, beyond.
Pierce Brosnan's acting is very good, but there's moments in it where there's like certain things they asked him to do that was just not in his wheelhouse, like his hurt acting, as Matt Gorley describes it. It is James Bonding podcast. If you ever watch Pierce Brosnan's hurt acting, specifically in The World Is Not Enough, his like lower jaw like dislocates and like comes out forward. He goes, it's really, it's not like it's gross, but it's just kind of like, well, that's a weird choice. Like that's what, when you're watching, like this is just a confusing choice. Why'd you do that? Who directed him to do this? But you're 100% right, Jen. Brosnan's is a mix of kind of like the seriousness of Connery's and the campiness of Moore's. And some people don't like that because it's Brosnan doesn't always pick a lane, and sometimes that can rub people the wrong way. But I love Pierce Brosnan as well. He's like a close second in terms of favorites, just because he was my first James Bond.
Has an
Totally
impact.
makes sense.
Yeah. I have a fairly limited experience, sort of scattershot, I would say, with James Bond, where my first James Bond film was GoldenEye. I was the right age when it came out. There hadn't been much Bond for a little while there. It was sort of the like New Who kind of feeling. There wasn't New Who at the time. I didn't know what that was. Hindsight, I knew it was New Who kind of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just need to set that correct here. What is podcasting but arguing with people who aren't there?
Correct.
That's why I
both
went into the
sides of
James
the
Bond
equation.
problematic stuff right off the bat because I love this franchise, but there's some fucked up shit in it, and I kind of want to let people know I'm not approving of it just to pre-argue the point before it even gets brought up.
We're crossing our arms and shaking our head the entire time. We've got this. But anyway, it was a hell of a movie, and it was one that was a little bit, despite Space Laser, a bit closer to the Sean Connery style.
Yeah.
It is very funny to think about what constitutes outlandish, what doesn't in these kinds of movies, but we'll get into that. And so naturally I played a lot of GoldenEye on the N64 at friends' houses. I didn't have an N64, so I mostly played the multiplayer. I didn't play single player until Matt and I were on a different podcast last year, I think, and needed to play it. So that was an experience. You know what? Maybe I will play the better N64 Bond game now on your recommendation here, Josh. So I've had a little bit of, I have gone back and watched Goldfinger. I watched Dr. No. I just wanted to see how different it could be and where James Bond started. I had a friend in high school who was a very big Ian Fleming fan and very much enjoyed the notion of somebody who worked in British intelligence in World War II and the character he created and where he pulled that from and those experiences. And there have been several writers working with the Fleming estate since Ian Fleming's passing, because there's only about like maybe 13 James Bond novels written by Ian Fleming. But we've had so many stories since. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a lot of cultural knowledge. I know many of the pastiches and the parodies that have gone on from there. Most of the time, my video game Spy uses a cardboard box. I mean, I'm not immune to the trappings of it all. I was involved in a nightlife show earlier this year where I wrote a fake, real James Bond song for the opening to that show called Friendship Never Dies. And it had horns. It's fine. I don't have anything truly definitive. I remember after enjoying GoldenEye, trying to watch Tomorrow Never Dies and then just kind of falling off. I've seen a little bit of everybody. I think I've seen at least one film from each of the major Bonds at this point.
Did you see Skyfall?
Yes, I did.
That's like
that one I saw in theaters.
that one. If you're going to see any of the modern stuff, that's in my opinion the best Craig one. The later Craig ones, the last two after that, Spectre and No Time to Die. Spectre, I think, is that one I have a lot of issues with. No Time to Die, I think, is actually really good.
Yeah.
It says something to the fact that a lot of the better James Bond stories try to establish something, and they're not building on something.
Yeah. And then I guess I will also ask, Jen, even with your scattershot knowledge of the different Bond actors, do you have a favorite of the ones that you've seen?
I would say I don't have a favorite. And not because I love all of my children, but kind of I find the stronger Bond entries, regardless of medium, are ones where they're really like setting some groundwork and trying to tell a complete story in a way, which is the way that a franchise can tell a like grounded thing. You have to set it up. I enjoy kind of what story are you telling? Who could do this? Sean Connery couldn't do Skyfall kind of thing, whereas Pierce Brosnan couldn't do Goldfinger, where like any of those kind of things. So what I've seen, I've enjoyed, I suppose, is where I'm at.
Fair enough. As for me, I am closer in line with Josh, though my first movie is closer in line with Jen, as Jen and I are basically the same age. I think I had seen From Russia with Love as like a young teenager.
That's a really good one.
Because my dad loved the Bond films, but I don't know that I like really made any kind of like permanent connection to it. I just I had seen a smattering of the Bond movies growing up, but it wasn't until GoldenEye came out and I knew it was in theaters and I saw the trailers like, oh, that looks awesome, and went to see that with my dad in the theaters and went, oh, okay, I love James Bond. And I would go back and rewatch a lot of the older movies, and then I would watch every Bond movie that came after. I watched the whole Pierce Brosnan run, and then I watched the whole Daniel Craig run. I think Daniel Craig's first and last movies are his best. I think everything in between is varying quality. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but like I have a soft spot for Casino Royale, mostly because he's so cold and bad at his job. To me, that's entertaining, is that he's so, because it's his first outing technically. It's why, we'll get to it, why I love First Light so much also. I like an inexperienced Bond. I think it's fun to watch the character learn. But like Jen also, once I saw the movie and then the game came out, I had, and I don't have it anymore and it kills me, but I was given GoldenEye as a gift from a friend, and I had the gold cartridge when it came out.
Okay.
But I didn't keep it because they did a gold cartridge for GoldenEye and they did one for, I think, Ocarina of Time as well. They had or colored cartridges.
And also for Majora's Mask as
For
well.
both Zeldas, they did.
Yeah.
Yellow for DK64, green for Rayman 2. Yeah, there's a couple ones.
And so, which I don't have anymore,
Turok.
but I also played a ton of GoldenEye. Since I owned it, I played the multiplayer and the single player a ton. I was very bad at it. And I would go on to play, I didn't play any of the Bond games really before GoldenEye, except I did rent James Bond Jr. on the Super Nintendo because I also, my early love of James Bond really started with James Bond Jr. I had the toys. I watched the Saturday morning cartoon.
Okay.
Like I was the perfect age for James Bond Jr. I couldn't tell you jack shit about it now, but like I loved it as a kid. Like I had the Jaws toy and everything. Like I loved it.
One fun fact about James Bond Jr., he's James Bond's nephew. So I don't know why he's called James Bond Jr. It makes no fucking sense.
Yeah,
but
it makes
it's
no
his
sense.
nephew. Which
Well,
is
is
really
James
strange.
Bond his real name?
Yes,
yeah,
it is
that's true.
actually.
James
Canonically,
Bond.
James Bond is.
Yeah.
There was a theory for a while, a fan theory, that James Bond was a code name, but like they kind of put it to bed, and I'm glad they did. I think if James Bond would have been a code name, that would have been a really dumb idea because he already has 007. Why do you need two code names at that point? It just is like that's putting a hat
Because
on
we
the
are
hat.
very British and very secretive here. We can't have any of these things compromised.
Even though he goes around announcing, James Bond is such an interesting character in terms of a spy movie because he's either the worst spy ever or he is like a celebrity spy. You're like, oh, this is James Bond. Like, I saw him on the cover of Spy magazine. You know, like
Sterling Archer kind of thing.
Or
Basically.
he's actually like a good spy. Like he's either off because 9 times out of 10 he announces himself as James Bond. He doesn't keep his cover like 90% of the time. He'll get cover and then be like, well, they already know who I am. I'm James Bond. I'm like, then what? Then why even go through the writing of giving him a cover at that point? It's really kind of goofy. So James Bond is such a fun character just because I can't take credit for this nor credit for the Spy magazine joke. That was also Matt Gorley. But like James Bond's interesting because he's more of a caricature versus a character. Like he doesn't have in a lot of the movies, he doesn't go through personal growth usually.
No.
It's just kind of like he is the vehicle for these ridiculous things to happen around him. Daniel Craig's movies were probably the closest to having a full character arc because there's like a love story, both in Casino Royale and in some of the other movies as well. Pierce Brosnan starts it a little bit, especially in GoldenEye. Like, if you rewatch GoldenEye, the character of Natalia, she's a really good character. Like, she's a very strong character, and she's got agency, and it was really cool to see. And I still think she's one of the better Bond girls. So you see a little bit of like her pushing back on Bond's like
deal,
presuppositions. Essentially, like she pushes back against him and wins. Like, it wins arguments and stuff like that, and she kind of changes Bond and the character. The problem is that it still goes through the Bond syndrome, is that once the movie's over, she gone. Bond doesn't know her anymore.
Right.
So Bond's an interesting character because he's almost not a character. It almost seems like, how could a franchise run this long with a character that's not really a character? But they found a way.
Because it's an archetype, you want to tell the fun stories. And beginning my research into James Bond for this episode, this is on the Wikipedia article for James Bond. Ian Fleming talking about him in an interview. I wanted Bond to be an extremely dull, uninteresting man to whom things happened. I wanted him to be a blunt instrument. Like, this is the idea. Yeah, good at his job, bad at his job. Great spy, terrible spy, whatever it is. Like, he does work in intelligence, so there again, matters of code name and designation are, I am not a military person, so couldn't speak to that. But it truly, James, is meant as a, well, this is the mechanism through which the story happens, not necessarily a character.
I think the reason that works so well and continues to work well even is that for a while, when the Bond movies first came out, they were like travel logs. People like commercial flight was not a big thing. There's a reason why if you watch Dr. No, once again, I'm stealing another joke from, not from Matt Gorley, but from the James Bonding podcast on it. One of the first times you hear the Bond theme song in that movie, the first time is perfect. It's when he says Bond, James Bond, and he lights a cigarette, and it's a really fucking cool intro, right?
The moment.
It's a phenomenal moment, like great cinematic moment. The second time you hear it, the very next time, he's walking through an airport. That's it. Nothing happening in the airport. He's just walking through an airport. So why would you play that then? It's because people didn't do commercial flights in 1962.
No, this was early Pan Am days.
Yeah.
Like, this was, we were trying to get people into the idea.
So it was travel logs, and so Bond could be a dull character because you could go to all these fantastical places and kind of let the places stand out as a character that much more.
Which is an interesting thing of time where the world got smaller and kind of a cusp of the faraway exotic, as well as sort of an unexamined British colonialism. Those things that are absolutely, we're not doing anything terrible. We're not hurting anybody. We're not subjugating anybody. But you do feel a little entitled to what you're showing and what you're doing. And even on a baseline level, there is something delightfully, unexaminedly British about it.
Yes. To zoom out a bit and to close the loop on my Bond experience.
Oh, right. That's what we're talking about. Jesus.
Yes. Not only would I go on to see every movie after GoldenEye and go back and see the old stuff, and while I didn't really, like I said, go back to the old games, I don't think I played Legends, but before Legends in 2012, I played everything. A version of everything, right? Because this was the era, the high time of multi-platform, portable gaming versions and console versions, but I had played every major movie tie-in release. I played the PS2 From Russia with Love game, which was really interesting for the time, and even the GoldenEye remake on the Wii, which was bad, but was interesting. There was this arc of James Bond, then not only movie tie-in games, but then the movie actors doing game stories that didn't have movies, which I thought was interesting. And then we would hit the world of Espionage, which was a mobile game, and then a Dead Zone for basically 10 years, where no one touched Bond. Cypher 007 came out, but it was a crappy mobile game. Nobody played it. We got a Bond game almost every year for a decade. And then even in the early days of games, in the 80s, we basically got one every year through the early 90s. The only Dead Zone of this length was the 10 years before First Light, which I think is really interesting. Beyond that, the largest gap was from 93 to 97, and even then, that's not that big of a gap for video games.
Well, and it's an interesting kind of sense of era, because 80s games development with licenses, it was sort of cheap and it was quick. Video games had a very different feel about them and a very different reputation. And so the amount of times that there were NES games that were, oh my God, Fester's Quest, I got Addams Family. This was based off of the TV show. The movie hadn't come out yet.
Yeah.
There's Three Stooges games. There's all these other things that are just kind of, we're just grabbing stuff. There's a Goldfinger video game that came out in 1986. The video game adaptation of Live and Let Die came out 15 years after the film did. If you had that kind of, real quick timing in social media today, no, you wouldn't. So that was kind of we're keeping it going, again, 80s Doctor Who sort of feeling. And then in 97, we got GoldenEye. And then that was kind of okay, we're on top of things and let's go with that. Around the time that Daniel Craig took over, I feel like where game development was and where licensing was a bit different. And Casino Royale, you could make some fun video game stuff out of that. You could make some cool stages, but it didn't have the same je ne sais quoi, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And so, we entered into a phase of what is the identity of James Bond films, of secret agent games, because there were also a lot more secret agent games. We had Hitman, we had Splinter Cell, we had Metal Gear Solid, we had Siphon Filter back in the PS1 days. Right. The PS1 N64 era was a lot of other video game exclusive spies and action heroes and intelligence agents getting their own franchise, their own series, and you didn't have to pay licensing fees.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think one of the reasons Bond games slowed down a lot, there's a number of reasons. One, 007 Legends flopped horribly. And so Eon Productions, before they sold off all the Bond rights to Amazon, I still hate that deal, but neither here nor there. It burned them. It burned them pretty bad. I don't know all the ins and outs as to why, but pretty much anything post Quantum of Solace in 2008, the Bond movies production slowed down to a crawl.
Yep.
Yeah.
2008, it was Quantum of Solace. 2012 was Skyfall, which was a pretty long gap. Then there's only a 3-year gap, 2012 to 2015 for Spectre, which is respectable. 2021 is when No Time to Die came out, 6 years later. Now, it was originally slated to come out in early 2020, but the pandemic happened, so it got pushed back. So realistically, if you're going to be generous to it, it's a 5-year gap, which is still one of the largest gaps. Prior to Die Another Day, which was 2002, and Casino Royale, which was also a 4-year gap, was because Casino Royale was 2006. That was like the largest gap next to, I want to say, License to Kill in 1989 and GoldenEye in 1995, which was 6 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I think the reason the Bond games stayed relevant for as long as they had is because Bond was always in the movie theaters. Bond movies were coming out consistently. Roger Moore would release a Bond movie every 2 years, like clockwork. Sean Connery back in the 60s or 70s, granted, those games were not out at the time yet. Video games weren't really as a thing then. That was yearly. Dr. No is 62. From Russia with Love is 63. Goldfinger is 64. Thunderball is 65. Like, they released 4 movies back to back to back, like year after year after year. That's crazy. Yeah. And so as production and human rights got more involved, they actually treated their production staff a lot better, which they should.
Here.
It delayed production time. Totally fine with that. But Bond has since, it almost feels like the producers, like Barbara Broccoli, even before she sold it off to Amazon, there was so much indecisiveness. Like I do think the producers kind of at one point are like, our family has owned this license for over 50 years and we're just kind of done. Like to me, it seemed like that. So I think as they slowed down, so did the games. And that's why we've had this crazy long gap, because 007 Legends came out in 2012, the same year as Skyfall. There was 2 Bond movies out in that crazy year, in that 14-year gap. 2 Bond movies. That's it. So no wonder there's not games coming out. There's no push for it because there's no movies to tie it in.
I think what's interesting also is GoldenEye, not on its own, but makes first-person shooters popular on consoles. It, along with Halo, like Doom was popular, but Doom was kind of everywhere.
And it wasn't a console game.
It eventually came to consoles, but it was a PC
But that
game
was still not the definitive version of that game, too, on home consoles.
Right. Whereas GoldenEye, that was the version. N64 was the version. That was it. And it then spun off into all these games. But between that and I would say the next run of games, all the way through the PS2 era, the popularity of the first-person shooter became ubiquitous, through the SOCOM series, through Halo, not only the spy franchises that didn't require specific license, but shooting games that also didn't require specific licenses. They were creating their own games, stuff like Quake, the early Wolfenstein games. All of this stuff was making shooting games, first-person perspective games, really popular, and Bond grafted onto that pretty seamlessly, and even the popularity of third-person shooters too. And so I think that's why it blew up in the way it did. It unfortunately led to kind of shooting itself in the foot. I think GoldenEye in 2010, there were a lot of reasons that game was bad, but I think leaning into the gimmick of the Wiimote and the Wii wasn't beneficiary to that game in the same way that it was, say, for like Resident Evil 4, which the Wii version is the best controlling version of that game. It just depended, and then they tried Bloodstone, which was an original game with Daniel Craig.
Which is really good. I think it's an underrated game.
It's a really good game, but nobody cared. So there are three things I think that contribute to the popularity of Bond in the late 90s to the mid 2000s. It was the early days of shooters on consoles. It was the heyday of licensed games. And like Josh was saying, the run of movies coming out at that time was relentless. And so those three things together were a really great fit for why James Bond did so well. And then after Legends flops, and then there's like a couple mobile games that go nowhere, like it appears that Bond, at least in video games, is dead. And then we get this and the murmurs of IO working on a James Bond game. We wonder what it's like. We're worried. We like Hitman, but who knows? Bond has not been handled particularly well since the mid 2000s. So like, what's that going to be like? I'm ecstatic to report that I think not only is First Light one of the best Bond video games ever made, but for my money, one of the best Bond anything ever made.
Flat out. It's so good.
I just think narratively, writing-wise, they really leaned in for the production values. They rebooted the character again in a way that was fun. The thing that sold me on this game is in the first 10 minutes, the montage as a tutorial, where you're like jumping from punch to different moments. That's taking James Bond as a movie and going, this is how we make it a video game, which of course IO can do that. They're so great at making set pieces. The Hitman games are known for that. And I think what's funny to me, and I remember Jen and I talking about this on Flashback 64 when we talked about GoldenEye, the original GoldenEye in 1997 is a very stupid looking game. I love it, but it is very stupid looking. But they didn't care. They committed to the cutscenes, even though there are these blocky humans doing stuff. That's the thing that I think makes James Bond great as a video game, and I've seen time after time in the better games, is they commit to the cinematography and the production value of what it is to be James Bond, even if graphically they can't even do it. I mean, even the Game Boy Advance game, Everything or Nothing, or the Game Boy Color game, The World Is Not Enough, which is a bad Game Boy Color game, they still like the framing, the way they set it up, and I think that's what really makes Bond unique. And playing through First Light and having beaten that game, I can say without a doubt that IO absolutely nailed it. I didn't find out until recently, though, that apparently IO doesn't just have the rights. They were given basically license to make this game, but Amazon can decide we're going to just let someone else make the next one, which would be idiotic.
It's a very bad idea, yeah. Doesn't mean they won't do it.
Right. But it blew me away that I thought, sort of like Respawn with Star Wars and some others, like they were given the license to make a series of games over a long period of time. But that's apparently not the case. This was a one and done. And without spoiling it, considering the way the game ends, I'm like, they got to give it back to them. And so it's a whole other problem, but I think it's really exciting. Like, I've always loved Bond and I've been a Bond fan, but I didn't realize how much I missed James Bond until I played First Light. That's the funny thing about license games, and we've talked about this on the show before. When you get a really good license game, all it does is make you re-fall in love with whatever that license is, right? And the best games to adapt stuff, like Star Wars games we've talked about in the past, or the Spider-Man games, which we did retrospective on, is like the best of them just remind you why you love that thing and are basically a love letter to that thing.
Absolutely. And before we get into First Light a little bit more, I just want to real quick touch on, I'm not going to do my full panel on the history of James Bond and video games, but just to kind of lead up to it, just like a really quick synopsis of it, because there's one like kind of narrative in the history of Bond and video games that I find really fascinating. The first game that I could find, I'm not saying it's the first Bond game, but the first one I could find is technically unlicensed. It's called Shaken Not Stirred. It came out on the ZX Spectrum in 1982. Bond fights paws instead of jaws. He fights tic-tac instead of knick-knack. It's really silly. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of the gameplay, because what's interesting, if you look at Bond in video games from 82 up until GoldenEye, right? Like that stretch, there's no consistent style of gameplay. There's text adventures, there's like point and click adventures, there's mixtures of all three. There is 2 different versions of A View to a Kill. One is a text adventure game. The other has like a top-down maze game to start off. Then it goes into like a point-and-click adventure game where, if you've seen A View to a Kill, there's a moment in the movie where City Hall in San Francisco is burning and Bond has to get Stacey Sutton out and save her. So they decided that's a great time to do an exploratory point-and-click adventure game as you explore through the building of City Hall in San Francisco, while you can see there's a little mini map on the bottom. You can see which rooms are on fire by which windows are all lighted up and whatnot. And then it ends with an exploratory platforming sequence in the mines, which is the finale of the movie. So it's really weird how they kind of like, they didn't really have any consistent theming with it. There's platformers, there's text adventures, and all this other stuff. But a couple standouts that I want to highlight from pre-GoldenEye. This one might be post-GoldenEye. I can't quite remember the date, but it's kind of like, it goes under the radar. James Bond 007 for the Game Boy. If you have not played that game, it's a Zelda clone. It's it's good. I'm not saying I haven't beaten it, but I've played a chunk of it and I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a Zelda clone. It's a top-down exploratory. You get different gadgets and whatnot, and you have to walk around towns and explore things. The levels are like enclosed. It's not like Zelda where it's a big world that you explore. You're given small, medium areas to kind of putz around in and find stuff, and then the next mission is like another area to kind of putz around in and whatnot. But very Zelda-like gameplay. So I want to shout that out. But 2, not a specific game, but I want to shout out, it starts off with a specific game. There's 2 text adventures that were developed by, I believe, Mindscape in the mid-'80s. It was Goldfinger and A View to a Kill. Both of those were designed and written by a man named Raymond Benson, a fascinating individual in the history of video games and James Bond. He first got on James Bond, Eon Productions, and the Ian Fleming Estates radar because he wrote the James Bond Bedside Companion as like a book in like the early 80s, maybe late 70s. Fun fact, there's a James Bond tabletop RPG.
Oh, hell yeah.
Wow.
And Raymond Benson wrote a module expansion to that tabletop RPG.
Oh, nice.
So he has history in writing TTRPG James Bond and an actual like fan book, the James Bond Bedside Companion. That got him the job over at Mindscape to do these James Bond text adventures. Raymond Benson would continue working in video games. He actually was the lead writer and story writer for Ultima 7 The Black Gate. He did an Are You Afraid of the Dark PC game in the mid-90s, in the early 90s, based off the Nickelodeon show. Remember the movie Indian in the Cupboard? He did a game based off that.
Yeah.
Huh.
In 1995, he stops making games. He suddenly exits the game industry because he was contacted by the Ian Fleming estate to be an official James Bond author. He is the first American to be an official James Bond author to continue writing the books. He wrote novelizations of many of Pierce Brosnan's, not GoldenEye, but Tomorrow Never Dies, World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day, and a bunch of original novels that he wrote. After he stopped doing the James Bond novels, he's not done with video games entirely, even though he's not making games anymore. He wrote novelizations of some of our favorite games. Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, he wrote the novelizations. He wrote the novelization of Homefront, if you remember that like Call of Duty clone from the early 2010s where North Korea invades the United States. He wrote a novelization of that. I think he also might have done some Splinter Cell stuff. I can't quite remember. But if you look at this dude's credits, like he's also wrote in musicals and theater. Like this man has like a crazy list of credits. And it's just fascinating to me how his story has started with James Bond, which transitioned him into video games, which then transitioned him out of video games into official Bond license, which then transitioned into video game novelizations. It's a fascinating story to watch his progression. I was lucky enough to interview him on the podcast. I could probably think of a million more questions now. This was a couple of years ago that I interviewed him, but I always like to shout him out when I'm talking about James Bond in video games because that's like a really interesting narrative that you don't really see all that often in game history.
I think I know about this Metal Gear Solid novelization because there's some ridiculous line that I now realize, yeah, this is somebody who wrote for James Bond, where apparently at one point Snake sneaks up on a guard, says Merry Christmas, knocks him out and says, "Oh, didn't anyone tell you Christmas came early this year?"
Amazing.
Yeah, that's an extremely James Bond line, especially for the end of "The World Is Not Enough." If you know that line, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Awful line. Awful line.
Terrible line.
Yeah.
And so maybe there's a little bit of that influence in there.
I am glad you brought all that up, Josh. It's very easy to forget. Basically, people go from like GoldenEye to modern Bond because GoldenEye, without a doubt, the most famous
Absolutely
James Bond game ever made, GoldenEye 007 in 1997. Yes. Because of that crux of like license meets first person meets popularity, like it was kind of a focal point. It's why I think while there are other good games after it in that next decade, they're all chasing the same high.
Nightfire.
Yes. I mean, well, so you brought it up, and like Nightfire is one of my favorite James Bond games. I played it on the PS2 when it came out.
So good.
But they would keep returning to it. Like GoldenEye Rogue Agent would come out a few years later. And I think none of the Bond games are awful in that era. I think some are better than others. But they all are basically following a similar formula. It's funny, talking about all of those games in the mid to late 80s doing a mix of stuff, and then these games most consistently being either first or third person shooters, with the exception of the portable consoles.
And a few vehicle segments, but yeah, it's mainly just shooting.
Yeah. Except for 007 Racing on the PlayStation,
which is a narrative racing game, and it's got one of the worst CGI models of Pierce Brosnan I've ever seen in my life. The Uncanny Valley is hitting hard.
I am constantly reminded of the sheer litany of bananas narrative racing games or just franchise racing games that are on the PS1 specifically.
I mean,
last week I saw the Bomberman racing game for the first time and I was not prepared.
Yeah, that was like a go-to licensing thing. You think about Disney racing games, Nickelodeon racing games.
Yeah, put them in cars.
Put them in cars. Make them do stuff in cars. I've not gone back and played a lot of these games. I'm cooking up a new Patreon series for the podcast where I revisit stuff. And so I will probably revisit some of these. But like, I remember how big of a deal From Russia with Love was because Sean Connery was doing the voice for it and they were recording new lines.
Yes.
And they weren't just recycling stuff from the film. That was unheard of before that. Whereas like, I feel like now that's even more common. I think a game like From Russia with Love would be more likely to happen now because of the influx of legacy sequels too in film. That like we're revisiting old franchises more often, whereas back then it was just not a common thing.
No.
To me, that's like the golden era of James Bond in video games. Prior to, we'll see if this becomes an era with First Light. This could be another golden era.
Yeah,
but like at least Agent Under Fire was not the first game with a Bond game with an original story, but it was kind of the first post GoldenEye for the most part. Well, 007 Racing. Yeah. I'm talking about good ones. Agent Under Fire is not a phenomenal story, but it's one of their first attempts to not make Bond just another FPS game or another, like, let's take this and just put Bond as the character into this already existing formula, because they added Bond moments in that. If you did something cool, you hear the little music sting, the and the little 007 logo would come up. It was meant to make you feel like, hey, this is something Bond would do in a movie. So by you choosing to do this in the game, you get to feel more like Bond. It's a really good step forward. And then Nightfire escalates that idea even further by making a cold open mission that leads into an original song. It's an original song for the game that's like a Bond style song. And then there's a whole Bond style story with that. And then Everything or Nothing, same thing. They did the same thing for that cold open original song with the whole thing. But that's a third person shooter compared to a first. It's great. I've done episodes on that. If you all are curious about more specifics on those games, you can check out those episodes. But for the sake of brevity, after that, what you were saying, Matt, with From Russia with Love, that's a fascinating thing, because Connery coming back, I think, still would be weird, not just because he's dead, but like because the last time he was Bond in a movie was in 1983. So 83 to 2006 or whatever it was when From Russia with Love came out. That's over 20 years that he had not touched the role. And he comes back and they add 2 new characters to it. And let me tell you, they cast mid-2000s actresses for it. They added 2 new Bond girls that were not in the movie. Natasha Bedingfield and Maria Menounos.
Oh my God.
Very mid-2000s celebrity names. And they get nothing to do. They have so little to do in that game. It's sad. And then obviously it continues on with like, they try to do GoldenEye again. They do Bloodstone, which is another original story that's really good. 007 Legends was the last one where they had like a contemporary video game version of a movie there, because there's a Skyfall DLC that you could get with it, which now you cannot get. Like that's just gone. Like there's no way for you to get that legally. I don't even know if you can get it illegally, but as far as I know, there's no way to actually get that.
Huh.
One last thing, just talking about the history of Bond and video games. Rogue Agent is a good game that people shit all over because it's got the name GoldenEye in front of it. It is the most absurd James Bond fan fiction you will ever see. And it's amazing. It's so clever. It's better than people say it is.
Good to know.
I think to that point, licensed games in this era are very different because they're being handled differently. They're rarely movie tie-ins. They're more often than not original things. Like I mentioned Spider-Man earlier, the Arkham trilogy or the Arkham quadrilogy, because there's 4 of those. That's become the bread and butter for licensed games, is like, let's make an original thing. Let's hire people who have a fondness for it or who wrote for it or will write for it or whatever. And I think that has shown in the later stuff. We see hints of that with Bloodstone and Rogue Agent and these original stories with Bond. And I think it's so easy to go, well, this isn't my James Bond or this isn't Pierce Brosnan back then. Whereas now, because we are going out of our way to cast different people as these characters and portray them differently and do something new from the get-go, like Yuri Lowenthal is my Spider-Man. Like, I like all the Spider-Men, but, like, he's my Spider-Man right now. I love those games. I love his performance, and I'm not just saying that because he's a friend of the show. Also, I'm glad you mentioned the music, right? All of these Bond games that had original Bond songs for them. One of the things that absolutely flabbergasted me when booting up First Light is the Lana Del Rey. The song is incredible, which it's Lana Del Rey. Of course it's incredible. It's the cinematography of that interesting. It feels like one of the Bond movies, which they could do back in the 2000s, but it wouldn't look as good as it does now. And I was just absolutely floored by that because it makes you feel like you're playing the movie, which is, since we've started playing video games, is all we've ever wanted.
Yeah. Fun fact, Arkham ties in directly to First Light, believe it or not. The developers specifically cited the combat system in the Arkham games as the template for what they did in this. There's a specific reason for that. It's not just like, oh, let's just take something that works, and it's not like a laziness thing.
No.
It literally was one of the very intentional design choices they made in this game is that they want James Bond to feel capable. They never want you to feel like you are not capable like James Bond is capable. So they picked a control scheme that, like, most gamers have experience. I'm not saying every single gamer has played the Arkham games, but most people who are going to be playing a James Bond game probably have dabbled in the Arkham games.
And the Arkham games also influenced other games after that, so it is part of the common language.
You want to have that common language because you want Bond to feel in control. Like, you never wanted Bond to seem bad, but there was another part of it where they talk about, like, you want him to feel accidentally good. That's why a lot of the combat is so haphazard, and you'll get into a combat scenario and all of a sudden you're like, and you'll finish it, you'll complete it, and you're like, I don't know how I survived that. Like, you'll be trying to punch a dude, and all of a sudden Bond will grab a mug, like, oh wow, there was a mug there, and you hit a dude in the head and it knocks him out. That type of feeling, trying to elicit that feeling, was super intentional because they want you, like Bond, the character in the movies, where things are done a little haphazardly. Bond isn't a John Wick who is consistently in control of every scenario. They wanted the players to feel like they were in control, but when shit went crazy, they wanted you to feel like you accidentally did something good, which also is such a rewarding feeling, because how awesome is it when you feel like you cheesed the game, like you did something the developers did not intend you to do. They kind of designed it into the game for this to make you feel like you're doing something that you might not have been intended, even though they kind of did intend it. That's really smart game design.
And it plays into, I find, the best lane for someone like James Bond, a character that is not a commando, not the SHIELD agent kind of complete solution, but an intelligence officer, one who's infiltrating and gathering with military experience and, like, isn't a complete pencil pusher. But anytime there is gunplay, a fight, danger, this is James getting in over his head, one way or another. And just because he is capable enough or fortunate enough to get out of it doesn't mean that he is suddenly Sam Fisher.
Yeah.
there's a difference there. I think
Yes.
that there was also discussions about this with IO that was kind of it's not Agent 47. You're not doing
Yeah.
assassinations. Like, this is
Yes.
very much about earning the 00 number and about earning the license to kill. So you're not killing people,
Mm-hmm.
but you're far more cool than someone like Nathan Drake, where,
Yes.
again, Uncharted and that lineage plays into a lot of modern design of wide open spaces as in terms of how people think of them, which is another cinematic element. The recursive nature of you don't have as many video game adaptations because you can just make a video game that's like a film without having to make the film first.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Uncharted, actually. And I do want to say to start, like, if you're worried about spoilers, we're barely going to talk about the narrative. My focus for this, I think, is going to be more mechanically, graphically, casting. I don't want to ruin the story because I think the story is one of the best parts of this game. And also, I don't think we need to talk about it. It's James Bond. You know the gist of what James Bond does. I'm glad Jen brought up Uncharted because I'm someone who loves the Uncharted franchise. Lost Legacy is the best game. I will fight you.
You're
Chloe
correct.
is
That's the correct opinion.
Chloe is one of the best characters in video games. Anyway, I love that series, and I love The Last of Us as well. I like those games a lot, but I was sad that that's the direction they went in because I really like the Uncharted games. I like the campy nature of them. I like the Indiana Jonesiness of it, and like I love those games a lot. And knowing that we're never getting one for a while, if ever, is a bit of a bummer. To that end, Jen is absolutely right. This is the next evolution of an Uncharted right? Like there's so much more to it. The reason I love this game so much is it gave me that cinematic story feeling, that engagement and integration for a game, that immersion that the Uncharted games gave. And like to the combat also, I'm bad at combat in games. I die a lot. I'm on easy mode most games. Like, I'm just bad at combat. But what I loved about this is exactly what you said, Josh, that it made me feel more capable than I was. And I also love the scrappiness of the combat. In every other game that has guns, if you're shooting a gun and you try and throw a punch, you're dead. You need to be shooting. But in this, more often than not, if I ran out of bullets and had thrown my gun at the face of the guy...
I love that you could just throw it. You could just whip it at him.
That's the Hitman. I love it.
Yeah. And then that didn't take them out. Then I bum rushed them, charged them to the ground, knocked them out, and then went after the next guy. I, more often than in any other game, went from shooting to punching to shooting to punching constantly because they created a combat system that doesn't penalize you for it, especially for playing on the easier difficulties.
And kind of to the Arkham idea, in the Arkham games, it is very stealth heavy, which so's First Light. But that's much more of a coming in from the shadows and dropping down and taking them out kind of thing, versus if you're in a fight in First Light, you got to finish the fight, kind of feeling. And so you use this until it's done. You use the next thing until it's done. You have to run it down. You have to use everything possible. And sometimes the game will find things for you that you didn't even realize were there. Grabbing a mug, as an example. There's so many times you look around you in a game. It's the waist-high fence problem of, why can't I jump that fence? I'm jumping over the fence. Why aren't you letting me jump over the fence? Why am I disarmed? There's so many things I can swing at you right now. There's so many things I can do. This gives you a lot of possibilities. And that is another evolution in game design, whether indie games or larger games with the budget, and they use it in a way that I like, is exploring possibilities and letting environments be interactive, allowing for the objects that you have in a game to not be single use. You're out of bullets, throw the gun. That feels, oh man, I've got nothing. Just throw the gun at them. I can do that. Oh my gosh.
I want a quick shout out because I found the article I was looking for before. Jade King over at The Gamer has 3 amazing articles where they interviewed a bunch of devs from IO about the work on First Light. And one of the things is that James Bond cannot feel like a fool. It's not that that's what I was trying to get. And I think they really nail that. Bond never feels like a fool in this. But he does, like you were saying, Matt, it's very scrappy. Or no, sorry, Jen, you said it was scrappy.
Yeah, very like in over his head whenever there's a fight.
And the accidentally good thing, like you accidentally succeed, is very important. They also, to what you were saying, Jen, about the stealth, they also never want you to feel like you have to do stealth. They want you to be able to transition from one to the other because, that, in all honesty, that's what happens in Bond movies.
Yes.
They even added mechanics to it where when you're doing stealth, you don't have to not be seen. You can bluff your way through through some areas. And there was a couple times where I would walk into a room, bluff the dudes, walk out, there'd be another guy, and I would punch him. And I would use like stealth there instead of having just to use like espionage or subterfuge. There's so many different different ways to go through a scenario. And a lot of times when game developers give you a lot of different things for those scenarios, it's like multiple pathways, or here's a bunch of different gadgets you can use to, like, you can use this gadget to get through. You can either go, guns blazing, or you can sneak around. And that's usually the binary. It's those two things usually. And this has such a unique blend of the two, where you can be stealthy in one room. You can use literal espionage of bluffing your way through in another room. You can then do just balls to the wall, just shoot your way through a whole bunch as well. And everything blends together seamlessly, and it works for this because that's Bond in the movies. That's how Bond acts in the movies. And I think what makes this game so perfect for the license, like they really nailed Bond as a license for a number of reasons. The gameplay we've been talking about, and this is the only thing I'm going to talk about with the story, and I will not give specifics so we don't spoil anything. The Bond movies historically are reactionary to popular things in cinema and world events. In terms of cinema, like after Star Wars came out, Moonraker came out the very next year, right? If you watch at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, it says James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only. That's not the next Bond movie. It's Moonraker, because Star Wars comes out and they're like, oh shit, we got to get on this. And so they make Moonraker. Spectre is very much a reaction to Marvel movies, specifically like Captain America and stuff like that.
Yeah.
They're reactionary, but not just to what's popular in movies and cinema, but also to what's happening in society and the world. James Bond, especially during the Cold War in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, a lot of the plot lines feature Bond going against something that was an anxiety of the society. Like the Cold War, like there's a lot of times like where Bond will find some decoder from the Soviets that they are trying to steal, and he stops it, and they're at détente. Like they're at an impasse now, right? Bond historically has been, the storyline specifically are usually reactions to some public anxiety that's currently happening. This game does that, and it nails it so fucking well.
Yes.
In a way that doesn't feel too preachy. It doesn't feel preachy, but it also doesn't shy away from the anxiety that so many people, and I'm not just talking about people on kind of our side of the political spectrum. This is actually a very bipartisan issue.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so good. It looks at an anxiety of what's happening, and it made it a primary focus of the story. So not only does this game nail the Bond aesthetic in terms of its combat, with its being able to transition between stealth, espionage, and combat, but also with the storyline that it's telling and the specific characterizations of everyone. Like all the voice acting in this and the performances are phenomenal. I love how they wrote Bond. I love the new M. I like how Moneypenny's portrayed. I like how Q is. I love Q in this. They even have some nods to the tropes in Bond movies in the Q lab. Like Bond in the movies will dick around in Q's lab, and it pisses Q off that he just is fucking with all his toys. And you can do that. Like there's a section in the game where you can just wander around Q Lab and just kind of, hey, what does this do? What does this do? It lets you explore the lab. And if you notice towards the end of the game, this is not a spoiler, I promise. If you read on Q's desk, there's a note saying, he's like, why does it keep bringing back all my stuff broken? And that is a major, if you watch the Bond movies, he gets mad at Bond for that all the time. So like this game really just with every fiber, with every ounce of coding in it, just nails the Bond aesthetic.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up the intricacies of the combat and the narrative. I think that this is one of the best stories about this subject matter I've experienced, full stop, which is why I think I like it so much. But also to the combat section, Jen knows I struggle with stealth games. Jen finally convinced me to play Metal Gear Solid this year. I did love it. But like, I struggle with stealth games because 90% of the stealth genre that I've played, at least, if you fuck up, you're screwed. You have to start over, with minimal exception. That was the hardest thing about the Batman games, is that in the stealth required sections, you couldn't fight your way out of it. You had to do the stealth. The thing that makes First Light so good is that if you screw up, you might fight waves of enemies, but it'll be in one room, and once it's contained, it flashes situation contained, and then you can start stealthing again.
Yep.
You can go from action to stealth 8 times in one mission. That's a conservative number. I probably did it more. I loved that. I think that's what I need in a stealth game to make it accessible to someone who's bad at stealth. And it made me feel like I was good at stealth. And like I would use the same tools all the time because I got comfortable with them. But ultimately, between the gadgets, the bluffing, and the fact that you could just talk your way out of a stealth situation, also a thing that's not in most stealth games, is like you get caught, you can press the bluff button if you have the energy for it. And he bluffs his way through it like he would in the film. You walk into the other room, close the door, take off the costume, and move on or whatever. And that plays into the cinematic nature of it as well. I think the place that this game struggled the most for me was the boss fights, not because they were bad, but because they felt the most video gamey.
Yeah.
They still did them in interesting ways. And those were also very similar to Arkham. Like the first boss fight against the twins, I won't say more than that narratively. That's a very Arkham-y boss fight as you scramble to try and fight them. I think that's done really well. Again, they don't punish you too hard for losing those fights.
Yeah.
You're back into it pretty quick. The load times were a little long on the regular PS5, but like not unbearably so. I think only unbearably so comparatively to other modern games. The thing about this game that I think it understands the assignment is it's not just trying to be a Bond video game. It's trying to be Bond, full stop.
Yes.
It's, again, the other games that we've cited, like Arkham, like Spider-Man, like the Indiana Jones game, which I haven't played, but I've heard about.
That's really good too.
All of these games are not trying to be a video game version of that. They are just trying to be that. They are trying to be that property and making it into a video game, which is a smarter way to handle licenses. And I think something that First Light does exceptionally.
To what you're saying, how they're just trying to be Bond, obviously that was intentional, but one of the ways they did that was through sound design. They had a Bond out sound design edict where they put a lot of detail into the sound effects that are within like a 3-foot radius of Bond. The shoes, how Bond walks on different surfaces. Like they put a lot more detail into it than they normally would. And as the world goes out 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, whatever it is, there's less and less detail in it because they wanted Bond to be the focus. In the movies, that's how it is. Bond is the focus. So why wouldn't it be that in the game? It's exactly what you said, Matt. They focused on being Bond and found a way to make the medium work for the character as opposed to making the character work for the medium. They do it with the combat. They do it with the story. They do it even, I would say, you talked about it earlier in the episode, Matt, the training montage.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about it on my episode for it, which I don't know if it'll be out before or after this. That montage, I don't think you could have done that on earlier hardware. Like most game devs, like you see advertisers, like they'll advertise the graphics. Look how pretty this is, ray tracing, all this other shit. The game looks beautiful. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but what it sounds me more is like the way this montage works for those who have not seen it is that they will give you like a prompt of like, here's how to punch, right? And you go into a literally like maybe tops like a 5-second fight. Just enough for you to understand what you're doing. You're going to hit this button to punch this dude, and then you move on. And then immediately, no loading screen. It just fucking changes to another scene, completely scene, just cold change. And now all of a sudden you are in a driving segment, and then you drive through a short segment, and then it cold changes again. No transition, just the whole screen changes instantly, and you are still Bond, and you're doing like a platforming challenge. Just like in a montage in a movie, like if you're watching Rocky or something like that, in the beginning of the montage, Rocky's struggling with all his workouts, and then you fucking Sylvester Stallone can't lift a weight or whatever. And then by the end of it, he's like lifting like 20 weights. And in this, you start off with simple combat mechanics, simple driving mechanics, simple platform mechanics, and then it repeats the same order again in the montage, and then it's more complicated. It introduces a new type of combat, like hand-to-hand combat, a harder section of the platforming, a harder, more challenging section of the driving. It's all done instant loads. I'm really impressed by that because that's something that is, to me, a really good example of why more powerful hardware is good. We've been so focused on the graphical capabilities, which is a decreasing scale of like noticeable return on investment.
Oh my gosh, yes.
This is an example of like, oh my God, you literally couldn't do this on the PS4. You couldn't have this level of just instant loading. And I think that's just what impressed me so much. The technical spectacle isn't the graphics. It's literally a gameplay mechanic. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
It's the cinematics, as it were, because there again, you always want to be able to play the movie. There were games in the PS1, PS2 era that had tutorials that were like, here's a segment of this one thing, here's a segment of this one thing, that all had loading screens between them. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Josh. Those were a chore then, and they're even more unforgivable now. That montage training reminded me of how wowed I was playing Miles Morales on the PS5, where you did the fast travel of you picked where you were going and it zoomed in and you were swinging.
Wow.
Yep.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't play Miles Morales, so I didn't know they did that. That's really cool.
I mean, they do in Spider-Man 2
Yeah.
as well. And that level of
Yeah.
if you're doing it on the PS5 and it can preload those areas, so you're able to utilize that and harness that. And I fully agree, Josh. Like, that is where increasing technology, utilizing a big team, heavy hitting, whatever, is going to pay off and do well in the ways that if you're going to put in everything, boil it together, like make it work together. Sew the seams. Make it as big or as small of a game as you want. But nowadays, as far as design goes, I think even down to indies, you want to have it be seamless. If you want it to be a trudge, you make it as much of a trudge as you want. If you want that quick pizzazz, that is what we want. That is what we are expecting, and you need to scope it accordingly. Fortunately, IO is able to do all of that with a cinematic game because they're a big enough studio.
Yeah.
And they're not even a huge one. They're like
No.
a more middle-sized AAA dev.
But they are very experienced.
Yes.
They've done Hitman, and then here we are as well. They're not exactly the same. This isn't Hitman 4. It is building on all of their experience, and they have already solved so many of these problems that they can then really focus on what makes James Bond, which I think also speaks to how successfully they did that in First Light.
And I will say, like, as someone who is a fan of IO from a distance and has played some of the older games, I think the last Hitman game I played was Blood Money on the 360. Like, I've not played the World of Assassination trilogy.
It's really good. It's worth playing.
And I understand it's different from this, but having played this now, I feel like I even more so want to go back and play the World of Assassination trilogy. The thing about the graphics, too, is when a game goes for realistic graphics and grounded graphics, it can be jarring, right? I think of the party trick that was, what was the Rockstar game where you played as the detective? I can't
LA
remember
Noire.
the name of it now.
LA
Noire. Whereas like the facial capture was really good and everything else wasn't really that good. But then we get games like Control and Alan Wake 2 where Remedy is pushing the limits of what realism can look like in the graphics, right? The facial capture, the character models, switching to FMV. They are one of the pinnacles, I think, for capturing the real look and faces of characters until now. And the reason I brought up LA Noire is because the focus on not just Patrick Gibson's performance as James, vocally and facially and motion capture, but the fact that we spend so much time looking at him and M and John Greenway, looking at their faces, seeing their eyes, looking where they're looking, seeing their emotions. There's more face acting in this video game than I have seen in any video game probably since Control or Alan Wake 2, because those games really use faces to mess with you. They know they're making a spy film. They know that lying and moments are important for those characters. The emotionality of those one-on-ones between M and James are so good because of how impressive these graphics are. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. This is bar none my favorite Bond story.
Yes.
And I don't know if Patrick Gibson's my favorite. I think I have a soft spot for Pierce Brosnan, who's my favorite because, again, GoldenEye was the first one I saw in theaters. But Patrick Gibson, I struggled with the first mission when you're not technically Bond yet, right?
Yes.
When you're still the helicopter pilot. But the minute he's wearing the leather jacket and having the first conversation with them in the office, I was in. I was like, I buy it. You're this character. I believe it. And I only believed it more and more over the course of the game. That's the impressive thing about the acting in this game is that, again, we've had great stories and great narratives and great capture in games. You know, The Last of Us is considered a pinnacle of acting in video games, and I don't disagree. But I think there's something particularly different about a game like this that's meant to be both self-serious and goofy at times and, like, turns on a dime without spoiling anything. When you go from the intro of the game to, like, that first real story beat, when things go down, it's heartbreaking. There was nothing before that that told me I would feel that way when I got there because of the performances and because of these characters and the way that Patrick specifically plays James in those moments. I saw versions of other Bonds in him. Like in those serious moments, I saw Daniel Craig. In the goofier moments, I saw Roger Moore or Pierce Brosnan. Like, and that's what I think is really impressive about him playing this character. He is paying homage to the characters that have come before. It honestly reminds me of Matt Smith's performance as the Doctor. While his big thing was being an old man in a young body, he also said that he was trying as often with the way he walked, the way he talked, the things he said and did, he was trying to pay homage to what came before, the other Doctors.
Yeah.
And you really saw it in his performance, and it made him a really strong Doctor as a result. And I absolutely see that with Patrick Gibson, because by the end of the game, he feels like the Connery kind of prim and proper Bond. But before that, you see a range of emotions from the other Bonds, and it's really impressively done.
I put it up there with Bond movies. Like, I think I was on the Switch to the Past podcast. They were talking about the Lana Del Rey song, and I was mentioning how, like, it's not, like, I like it, but it's not, like, one of my favorite Bond songs.
No,
like, it's good, but it's not, like, a favorite Bond song. But it fits so perfectly into the themes of Bond songs over the last decade, from pretty much Skyfall till now. Between Skyfall, Spectre, No Time to Die, and this, they all sound a little similar, which I hope the next Bond song at least deviates a little bit. I'm not saying it has to be another, You Know My Name from Casino Royale, but just something that's not like this very dour, sad, serious song, which since Skyfall it has been. Bond movies have done that before. If you go back to the 70s, there's a lot of like love ballads is the Bond songs.
Well, it's like you have the Shirley Bassey and then you have Adele, and that's kind of like, well, that's lock that in for some people.
Yeah. To bring it back to First Light, I think what the reason this game works so well with the license, something you said earlier, Matt, where a good licensed game makes you want to re-experience that license again. And we haven't really had a Bond that feels like this in quite some time. This very much harkens back to like honestly a solid mix of like Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig. Like a little bit of the campiness and silliness of Bond, but it's much more serious than Pierce Brosnan was. And I think for the world we are living in right now, and this is not a spoiler for the game, something I'm personally craving, I can't speak to the public at large or anyone else. I'm a little tired of the sad game or the sad mood, like the sad for the sake of sad. Like I love Last of Us. Those games are so sad. They are so depressing. And I'm kind of tired of just depressing for this, like depressing automatically equal deep, or like
it's deep and dramatic.
Like, it's deep and dramatic.
Don't you know? Games are so grown up.
I'm almost gravitating now towards more silly, campy. Like I think Matt and I talked about it a year ago or so when the Naked Gun movie that came out.
Yeah,
that movie is such a breath of fresh air because it is so different than everything else we're seeing right now. And I'm kind of in the same mindset of this, where it's like I want a Bond like this. I want another Bond movie or game. Obviously, I want IO to be able to make another game if Amazon isn't stupid. It's a really well-crafted game that I put up on the same pedestal as some of the best Bond movies. It's so good. Yeah. It doesn't sacrifice gameplay for cinematics. Like I love the Uncharted games, but like Uncharted, the gameplay for Uncharted isn't cinematic, but the game itself is cinematic. Yeah. This is a really beautiful blend of like cinematics, like in terms of the movie, like the actual cinematics in the game and the voice acting and the performances, but then also having literally cinematic gameplay. It doesn't feel like you're having gameplay and then cinematics. It's a really seamless blend of the two.
It is the thing of, again, not to reference Metal Gear Solid again, but the reason why the cutscenes are in-engine graphics is because they wanted to create that kind of seamless feel. And many games have tried to create that seamless feel between cinematic and gameplay. And even in the times of the PS3 where you could just kind of get the black bars and it all starts to move, there are different ways to go about it. And I'm not saying First Light is the first one to do it or the best one to do it or nobody does it better or what have you.
Great Bond song.
Thank you. But it does what it sets out to do well. In media, in fiction, in games, in experience, that goes far and is probably one of the most important things.
I completely agree, Jen. And to Josh's point about the Sony AAA experience, right? Because that's kind of what we're taking a dig at, right? A lot of sad games with deep narratives, most of which are very good, but heavy. As someone who just finished God of War Ragnarok and cried at the end, I like those games, and I think they're important. But I think First Light was so refreshing because the last game, though it's not that old, that I played that made me feel the same way. And the reason I liked it so much, even though it was a 7 out of 10 ass game, was Outlaws. Star Wars Outlaws was a joyful adventure that had sad moments, but was like a romp. It was a fun ride with highs and lows. And that's exactly what First Light was. And that's what I want from a lot of games. I love the AAA experience in certain ways. I love the dramatic, deep games. But like, I got 3 hours into Ghost of Yotei and checked out, and I was so excited for that game. I love Eric Ishii. I loved Ghost of Tsushima. Like, it had everything going for me. But between the open world and the heavy narrative, which is fantastic, I couldn't do it. I needed something else. And that's another reason why I harken back to the Uncharted games, because at the end of the day, they're goofy as shit. And like, I love them. It's why I didn't hate the movie. Was it great? No, but like, it had the vibe. First Light is one of my favorites of the year. It's not my number one. And also with Wolverine and Control Resonant coming out in a matter of months, it doesn't stand a chance.
Right.
It is one of the most well done licensed stories I've experienced in a long time. And I genuinely was jazzed after finishing it. Like, I was just vibing. And like, I haven't had a AAA game hit me like this in a while, where I couldn't wait to play the next mission. I couldn't wait to keep going. I couldn't wait to see how the story resolved. Like, I just was so locked in. I think it's why I jumped in. Besides, I was recovering from surgery and needed something to do to distract me. But like, I think that's why I jumped into Ragnarok right after, because I'm excited for Lao Fei, and I never finished Ragnarok, and I was only in the beginning, so I figured I'd start over and play it through. And over like 5 days, I did. But it's because I was so high on the deep narrative and the fun ride of First Light that I wanted another AAA game like that, and I ended up loving Ragnarok as well.
And what I like too with First Light is that it still has like some deep moments, like you said, like it has some serious moments. I used it as the opening for my episode, and this does not spoil anything because I'm not going to say Bond's talking to a character, and I won't say which character, but I love this line. It's a character who's very aloof, no strings attached. They want to be in and out. They don't have to deal with any social obligations. And Bond has a line in it that resonated with me the first time I heard it, where the line is, I understand you're no strings attached, but you do realize those strings also hold you up. They're not meant to hold you down. I paraphrase that, but I love that line.
It's such a good line.
Specifically, the character he's talking to is kind of like, this could have been Bond in a different life type of thing.
Yeah.
And you're seeing the difference in how they came out. Bond probably would never be that person because Bond has a slightly optimistic view, which is that answer. Like, those strings are meant to hold you up, not hold you down, or something along those lines. I love that line because it's something that's a very insightful character moment, but it's not in your face. And I there's deep moments of that in this game, while at the same time, like you said, Matt, it's just a fun romp. It's a really just fun story, fun gameplay, goofy moments, especially with the combat. There's so many silly things you can do in that. I was watching someone play it where like someone shocked them, they threw their gun at them, it hit the person, and then they fall off the edge and just fall off a cliff. Or something like that, or fall out a balcony, and they didn't know they didn't know the cliff was there. They didn't know whatever it was, like whatever that ledge was. They had no idea it was there. The person just fell. They went, oh, well, all right, that worked out nicely, and it's great.
Yeah, it's a good time.
The thing that's interesting about Bond as a video game character is it's sometimes easy to forget that he's a licensed character like any of these other characters we've mentioned. I think because, to me, Bond is as crucial to gaming as many other characters. I just assume he's in the oeuvre of gaming. But the thing that makes First Light special, I think, is that it understands the character and doesn't try to fit Bond into a video game. It's just, let's make a James Bond story that happens to be a video game. It's a culmination of all the things, right? Like, again, I mentioned Outlaws earlier. That's a flawed game that I love, that has a great story, mediocre combat, and not a lot else. But it still shines through because of the story, and a story could go far. And if this game just had a great story, it would have been enough to like make it an okay game. But the fact that everything else, that the gameplay feels like James Bond, that the design feels like James Bond, that the music, that the sound feels like James Bond, that is not a thing that's easy to do. And it's why the games that I mentioned earlier, the licensed games that have been at the top of lists, even ones coming later this year, like Wolverine, that's anticipated to be another one of those. When you go in as a fan of the source material and understanding it, I don't understand how in our industry cynicism still breeds any success. Sincerity to me is the absolute golden gun bullet to success. Understanding the audience and understanding the property and giving it a sincere shot. First Light shows that when you give a studio with talent who is used to doing a kind of game that would lend well to your property and letting them do what they do best, we get games like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful that we got a review code for it. I'm glad that I played it. I don't know that I would have played it had we not. And that would have been my loss. And I'm grateful for it. When you get to play something like this, it renews my faith in storytelling in games. It goes beyond just adapting. It is transforming the property, right? And there are a lot of ways to do this, but to me, this is one of the most successful ways.
Echoing what you're saying about how they focused on making it Bond and then figuring out how to make the game work for that. I love Nightfire. I love Everything or Nothing. Okay, I'm indifferent on Everything or Nothing. It's not one of my favorites, but I know a lot of people love it. But Nightfire was my favorite James Bond game up until this one. Spoiler alert, this is now my favorite one.
Yeah.
Nightfire and GoldenEye and The World's Not Enough, Agent Under Fire, those were first-person shooters that had James Bond in it. There are some James Bond elements, like the Bond moments. I'd even say like The World's Not Enough has some really cool stealth levels, which surprised me. There's some really fun like Bond-type stuff in those games, especially in the GoldenEye and The World's Not Enough, where there's like extra mission objectives on the harder difficulties that are like, steal this data, that which feels very spy-like. But for the most part, the moment-to-moment gameplay is a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter or whatever that happens to be James Bond. This is a James Bond story that happens to be a video game. Still love Nightfire, still love that game to pieces, but like this nails the Bond aesthetic. It incorporates so much of what makes the movie special in game form that I have not seen another developer do.
Agreed. Josh, I want to thank you for joining us. You have done many a side quest for us. We are grateful. Jen and I have both been guests on your podcast many a time. We love collaborating with you, and we'll have to have you back soon. But for now, tell folks where they can find you online, where they can find your podcast, give them a little insight to Still Loading and all of that good stuff.
Sure. Hi. Once again, Josh, still host of the Still Loading podcast. Still Loading is, I describe it as a gaming grab bag podcast. I kind of cover a little bit of everything. I have interviews with people in the industry. I interview authors for books. I also will do deep dive retrospectives on individual games. Both Jen and Matt have been on for some of those deep dive retrospectives. Both of them have been on for some of the goofier ideas. Matt, you were on the Super Mario Fantasy Draft, I believe, for episode 300. Jen, you've been on the Final Fantasy Draft. Last year,
I think.
Was the year you were on?
You also let me rant for like 2 hours about the Game Gear. I will be forever grateful.
Oh, yes. We did Game Gear earlier this year. That was one of my favorite episodes to record, for sure.
That was fun.
Yeah, so a bunch of different topics. I also have like episodes where me and my friend Dexter are going through every episode of the Super Mario Super Show, episode by episode, like each episode of the show for an episode of the podcast, and breaking down the ridiculousness of that show. So yeah, I kind of cover a little bit of everything, diverse set of topics, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, all that good stuff. And if you want to follow me on socials, I'm at stillloadingpodcast.com on Blue Sky, at stillloadingpod on Instagram and Twitch, where I stream whenever the heck I feel like it, which lately it hasn't been for like 2 months, but I'll get back around to it. So yeah, that's where you can find me.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on here, helping us through the retrospective and sharing your thoughts on this wonderful new Bond game. And at this point, we turn it to you, listener. What is your history with James Bond? Do you like the movies? Have you read the novels? What's your favorite Q gadget? Would you want a watch that does everything that the Q watch does in First Light? It'd be pretty wild. And if you don't know what the Q watch does, you'll just have to play the game to find out.
Do you want an exploding pen?
Do you want an exploding... Watching GoldenEye compelled me to get good at spinning pens.
Yes, basically same. And clicking
them.
too.
I was doing the two click every time. And just, I want to be better than Boris. Always better than Boris. Let us know if that's what you want. Let us know what you're thinking. Please get in touch with us. Reach out to us. There's so many great ways to reach us. We are Fun and Games Pod on all social media that we are currently active upon, which as of this episode is Blue Sky, Instagram, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. Show us your James Bond collection, whatever that may be. I shudder to think of where that may go, and I am going to leave that open-ended, because what is intelligence gathering but being curious? You can visit certainpov.com and find not only other fantastic Certain POV podcasts, but a permanent invite link to our Discord server, where a lot of our topics are generated, a lot of discussion continues, and a lot of fun is to be had. If you like what Matt and I are doing and have the means or desire to support us, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. There is a free tier, so you can join at no cost to take part in polls for what our next console retrospective is going to be, access to our RSS feed for all of our episodes, or just a one-stop shop of all the things Matt and I are working on. But we do want to shout out the high scoreboard. And today the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Nyden, Sean Bowen, Film It Yourself, Dave Jackson, Tales from the Backlog, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, and Chris Copleen. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials, and when you're done with them, please do try to return them in pristine order.
Also, some big news. Jen and I, along with our associate producer, Sarah Moonen, will be returning to PAX West. We're very excited to be covering that event, as always. And I will be on 2 panels. More details on that to come. Keep an eye out on the socials. One of them has been announced already. Jen and I are going to be on video game trivia as a team for the first time. We are very excited. We have matching shirts and everything.
Oh, yeah.
The panel will be on Friday night. It's video game trivia. It is the 2 of us. It's Baron and Steph. And it's also, of course, Mike and Kyle and the ringmaster, the leader, Jacob McCourt, leading that panel. It's Friday, September 4th at 7:30 p.m. in the Frog Theater. So if you are there at PAX West, please come see us. I am totally relying on Jen's incredible brain for that. I will do my best to ride those coattails.
We are setting me up for a fall, boy, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
I love it.
But it'll be glorious either way.
It's going to be great. I am so excited, and I'm looking forward to playing the heel.
And I will also be on a panel on Sunday. More details to come on that. But please, if you are there, please say hi. And then, of course, if you want another free way to support us that isn't just joining the Patreon at the free tier, you can rate and review our podcast, Josh's podcast, any podcast you listen to. It is the best way you can support a podcast at 0 cost and just a tiny bit of your time. So please rate and review and share it with a friend. If you have one friend, not a lot of friends, we don't want a pyramid scheme, just one friend, tell one friend about this podcast. That always helps too.
If there's a pyramid scheme, don't tell us about it. We need deniability.
That's true. That's also true.
And whether you expect us to talk, you expect us to die, or something made you think that this was our first time, or if that this was your first episode of Fun and Games, thank you so much for being here. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jen Moonen.
And I'm at K Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Do you have a gaming subscription service like Xbox Game Pass or a crazy backlog and don't know what to play next? Well, 1H1D might be for you. Join me, Chris, and my college buddy Tom as we play a random game or a requested game for an hour and decide if it's worth playing past that hour. We go over the good, the bad, and maybe some little tidbits about the development you might not have known. Got 30 minutes? Give us a try, and if you like it, throw us a 5-star review. Try something new. You never know what might be your next favorite game.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.